In this video, we will explore all the cases of women who, after committing horrific crimes, will face the death penalty in the United States in the coming years. Christie Michelle Scott. On August 16, 2008, in Russellville, Alabama, Christie Michelle Scott, 30, intentionally set fire to her home, an act that resulted in the loss of her 6-year-old son, Mason Scott. Investigators discovered that Scott had recently increased Mason's life insurance policies to a total of over $100,000. Additionally, evidence showed that she had searched the internet for fire-related deaths and had purchased gasoline shortly before the incident. On August 20, 2009, Christie Michelle Scott was found guilty of capital murder for the loss of her son. The jury recommended a sentence of life without the possibility of parole with a 7-5 vote. However, the judge overruled this recommendation and imposed the death penalty. As of January 2025, Scott has spent more than 15 years on Alabama's death row. Currently, no execution date has been scheduled. Her case remains under appeals and legal review. Patricia Blackmon. On May 29, 1999, in Dothan, Alabama, Patricia Blackmon called emergency services, reporting that her 28-month-old adopted daughter, Dominique Bryant, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, they found the child with severe injuries, including a fractured skull, multiple broken bones, bruises, and a shoe mark on her chest. The investigation revealed that Blackmon had inflicted these fatal injuries, though the motive behind the crime remained unclear. In March 2002, she was found guilty of capital murder. The jury recommended the death penalty with a 10-2 vote, and the court accepted this recommendation, sentencing her to death. Currently, Patricia Blackmon remains on Alabama's death row. She has spent more than 22 years awaiting execution, with no scheduled date as her case continues through appeals. Tierra Capri Gobble. On January 14, 2004, emergency services responded to a call at a residence in Dothan, Alabama, where they found 4-month-old Cody Parrish unconscious. He was immediately transported to the hospital, where his passing was confirmed. The autopsy revealed that the cause was severe head trauma, consistent with violent shaking or a strong impact. Authorities launched an investigation and determined that Tierra Capri Gobble, the child's mother, was responsible for the fatal injuries. In 2005, Gobble was found guilty of capital murder. After jury deliberation, with a 10-2 vote in favor of the death penalty, she was sentenced to die. Since then, she has remained on death row at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Now, 44 years old, she has spent nearly 2 decades in prison. Her case remains under appeal, and no execution date has been scheduled. Wendi Andriano. On November 18, 2000, Joe Andriano, a man suffering from terminal cancer, was found lifeless in his home in Arizona. The autopsy revealed that he had been poisoned with sodium azide, a highly toxic substance. However, when the poison did not take immediate effect, he was fatally struck with a bar stool. Authorities launched an investigation and soon turned their attention to his wife, Wendi Elizabeth Andriano. Evidence presented at trial showed that she had administered the poison to her husband and, upon realizing he had not passed, brutally attacked him until he lost his life. In 2004, Andriano was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Since then, she has spent more than 2 decades in prison and is currently held in the Lumley unit of the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Shawna Forde. On May 30, 2009, an armed group stormed the home of Raul Flores in Arivaca, Arizona, intending to steal money and drugs. During the invasion, Flores and his 9-year-old daughter, Brisania Flores, lost their lives after being shot. His wife, Gina Gonzalez, was also shot but managed to survive the attack. The investigation led to the arrest of Shawna Forde, a former border vigilante and leader of the Minuteman American Defense Group. Authorities determined that Forde had planned the crime under the belief that Flores was involved in drug trafficking and had large sums of money in his home. Her accomplices, Jason Bush and Albert Gaxiola, were also arrested. In 2011, Forde was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Additionally, she received a 65-year prison sentence for attempted murder and multiple robbery charges. Since then, she has spent approximately 14 years on death row, currently held in the Lumley unit of the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Samantha Lucille Rebecca Allen. In July 2011, in Phoenix, Arizona, 10-year-old Amy Deal was subjected to a cruel punishment by her cousin, Samantha Allen, and Allen's husband, John Allen. The girl was forced to stay overnight inside a small plastic container, resulting in her death from asphyxiation. Investigations revealed a prolonged pattern of mistreatment toward Amy, who lived with multiple relatives in a home where she suffered constant abuse. The case shocked the community due to the severity of the mistreatment and the indifference shown by the adults responsible for her well-being. In 2017, Samantha Allen was found guilty of first-degree murder and 4 counts of child abuse. She was sentenced to death, becoming the 3rd woman on death row in Arizona. She has now spent more than 13 years incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Lyn Michaud. On December 2, 1997, 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson was abducted in Pleasanton, California, by Lyn Michaud and her partner James Anthony DeVeggio. Using a van specially modified for the abduction, the couple subjected Sampson to extreme mistreatment before ending her life and abandoning her body on a snowbank near South Lake Tahoe. The investigation led to the arrest of Michaud and DeVeggio, who were charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and multiple counts of assault. In 2002, both were found guilty and sentenced to death. Michaud has now spent more than 22 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. As of now, no execution date has been scheduled. Valerie D. Martin. In 2003, Valerie D. Martin, along with her 16-year-old son, a 14-year-old boy, and ex-convict Christopher Kenny, attacked her partner, 61-year-old William Whiteside, in Lancaster, California. After the assault, they locked him in the trunk of his car and set it on fire, ending his life. In 2010, Martin was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death for her role in the crime. She has now spent approximately 15 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Her case remains under appeal, and no execution date has been scheduled. Maureen McDermott. In 1985, Maureen McDermott, a former nurse facing financial troubles, planned the murder of her housemate, Stephen Eldridge, intending to collect his life insurance policy. To carry out the crime, she hired Jimmy Luna, a hospital assistant where she worked. Luna, along with other accomplices, stabbed Eldridge 44 times in his home in Van Nuys, California. They then attempted to mislead the investigation by mutilating the body to suggest a different motive. In 1990, McDermott was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances and sentenced to death. She has now spent more than 34 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. At one point, she was the only female inmate in the condemned unit. Catherine Thompson. On June 14, 1990, Melvin Thompson was shot and killed at his auto repair shop in Santa Monica, California. His wife, Catherine Thompson, a former office administrator from West Hills, orchestrated the crime to collect a $400,000 life insurance policy. To carry out the murder, she hired Philip Conrad Sanders. In September 1992, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, with the special circumstance of murder for financial gain. She was sentenced to death on June 10, 1993. She has now spent more than 31 years on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Manling Chang Williams. On August 7, 2007, Manling Chang Williams committed the brutal killings of her husband, Neil Williams, and their two young children, Devon, 7, and Ian, 3, in their home in Rowland Heights, California. Manling suffocated her children with a pillow and fatally attacked her husband with a samurai sword, inflicting over 90 wounds. Days later, she was apprehended, and during her trial in 2010, a jury found her guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Since then, Manling Williams has been on death row for over 14 years. Cherie Lash Rhoades. On February 20th, 2014, during a tribal meeting about her potential eviction, Cherie Lash Rhoades, the former president of the Cedarville Rancheria, a federally recognized Native American tribe in northeastern California, carried out a violent attack at the tribal office in Alturas, California. Rhoades fatally shot 4 people, including her brother, Rurik Davis, 50 years old, her niece, Angel Penn, 19 years old, her nephew, Glenn Keno, 30 years old, and the tribal administrator, Sheila Lynn Russo, 47 years old. After exhausting her ammunition, Rhoades grabbed a knife and used it on the 5th person, leaving 2 others wounded. The motive for the attack was tied to an eviction hearing related to accusations of federal fund embezzlement by Rhoades, who was being investigated for diverting at least $50,000 intended for the tribe. In 2017, Rhoades was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. She was sentenced to death, plus 150 years in prison. Since then, Rhoades, aged 55, has been on death row for over 8 years. María del Rosio Alfaro. On June 15, 1990, María del Rosio Alfaro, at the age of 18, committed a heinous crime in Anaheim, California. She visited the home of 9-year-old Autumn Wallace, whom she knew through the girl's older sister, under the pretense of using the bathroom. However, Alfaro entered the residence with the intention of stealing valuables to fund her drug addiction. Once inside, she brutally stabbed Autumn approximately 50 times, resulting in the child's death. After the murder, Alfaro looted the house and stole items that she later sold for $240 to buy drugs. In 1992, Alfaro was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in Orange County to receive a death sentence. Since then, Alfaro has been on death row in California for over 32 years. Skyler Preciosa Delion. At the age of 25, Skyler Preciosa Delion, originally known as Skyler Julius Delion, orchestrated the murders of Thomas and Jackie Hawks in 2004. Posing as a potential buyer for their yacht, Delion, along with accomplices, forced the Hawks to sign over the ownership of the vessel, then tied them to an anchor before throwing them into the sea, resulting in their deaths. Skyler gained fame for playing the Red Power Ranger in the early seasons of the TV show. Skyler has repeatedly asked the state to fund her gender transition while in prison. In 2008, Delion was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Since then, Delion has been on death row at San Quentin State Prison for over 15 years. In 2019, while awaiting execution, her gender was officially changed to female. Tanya Jaime Nelson. In April 2005, Tanya Jaime Nelson, a resident of Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, orchestrated the brutal murders of the psychic Jade Smith, 52, and her 23-year-old daughter, Anita Vobert Nelson, had previously sought Smith's services, wanting a prediction about her extramarital affair with her brother-in-law. When Smith advised her to move forward, Nelson became enraged. She traveled from North Carolina to Westminster, California, accompanied by her accomplice, Philip Zamora. Upon arrival, they visited Smith's home under the pretense of a social visit. Once inside, Nelson and Zamora fatally stabbed Smith and Vaux multiple times. To try to conceal their identities, they covered the victims' faces and hands with white paint. In February 2007, Nelson was sentenced to death for 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her accomplice, Philip Zamora, 55, also from Roanoke Rapids, pleaded guilty on April 14th to 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to between 27 years and life in prison. Since then, Nelson has been on death row in California for nearly 15 years. Jessica Marie Hann. In February 2001, at the age of 26, Jason Michael Hann committed a series of horrific crimes that led to his conviction and subsequent death sentence. Hann inflicted fatal injuries on his 10-week-old daughter, Montana, in Desert Hot Springs, California. This tragic event occurred less than 2 years after the death of his 2-month-old son, Jason, in Vermont. The bodies of the infants were later found in separate storage units, both in an advanced state of decomposition. All these crimes were committed in the company of the children's mother. In 2013, Hann was convicted of first-degree murder and child abuse. Since then, Hann, now known as Jessica Marie Hann, following a gender transition while on death row, has been incarcerated for more than 11 years. Heather Leavell Keaton. In 2010, Heather Leavell Keaton was involved in the deaths of her partner's 2 children, 3-year-old Chase DeBlas and 4-year-old Natalie DeBlas, in Mobile, Alabama. These crimes were committed with the children's father, John DeBlaze. Prosecutors allege that she poisoned the children with antifreeze and then strangled them to death. Their remains were later found in wooded areas in Alabama and Mississippi. In 2015, Leavell Keaton was convicted of capital murder for the death of Chase and involuntary manslaughter for the death of Natalie. She was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in Mobile County to receive such a sentence. On January 8, 2015, John DeBlas, 31, was officially sentenced to death by lethal injection by Mobile County Circuit Court Judge Roderick P. Rick Stout. Since then, Leavell Keaton has been on death row for approximately 10 years, incarcerated at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Her appeals have been unsuccessful, and currently there is no scheduled date for her execution. Lorraine Allison Hunter. In 2009, Lorraine Allison Hunter was convicted of orchestrating the murder of her husband, Albert Thomas. Hunter recruited her 16-year-old daughter, Brianna Hunter, to help with the crime, motivated by the financial gain of a $1 million life insurance policy. Prior to the murder, Hunter had forged Thomas's signature on 3 life insurance policies, naming herself as the beneficiary. On November 4, 2009, Thomas was found dead inside the cabin of his truck, having suffered 4 gunshot wounds. In August 2018, a Riverside County jury found Hunter guilty of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty. Since then, Lorraine Allison Hunter has been on death row in California for over 6 years. Belinda Magaña. In May 2009, Belinda Magaña, along with her boyfriend N.S. Nairn, was convicted of the torture and murder of her 2-year-old son, Valerie Magaña, in Corona, California. Authorities discovered the lifeless body of Malachi, showing signs of severe abuse, including bruises, burns, and indications of prolonged mistreatment. Magaña and Naran tried to attribute the injuries to accidental causes, but medical examinations contradicted their claims. In 2015, both were found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture. Since then, Belinda Magaña has been on death row in California for almost a decade, incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Susan Diane Eubanks. On October 26, 1997, at the age of 33, Susan Diane Eubanks committed the tragic murder of her 4 children: Brandon Armstrong, 14 years old; Austin Eubanks, 7 years old; Brigham Eubanks, 6 years old; and Matthew Eubanks, 4 years old, in San Diego, California. Eubanks shot each of her children in the head before attempting suicide by shooting herself in the stomach. She survived the self-inflicted wound and was arrested shortly afterward. In 1999, she was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. However, due to a federal court order against the practice and a moratorium on executions ordered by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019, the death penalty cannot currently be carried out in California. On October 4, 2024, she was sentenced again to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As of January 2025, Susan Eubanks has been incarcerated for more than 27 years. Veronica Gonzalez. On November 6, 1995, 33-year-old Veronica Gonzalez, along with her husband Ivan Joe Gonzalez, committed the tragic murder of her 4-year-old niece, Jenny Rhoades, in San Diego, California. Jenny had been removed from her mother, Mary Rhoades' custody, due to her entering a rehabilitation program for drug addiction and the arrest of her husband for child abuse. Jenny and her siblings were initially placed with their grandmother, but later, because Veronica and Ivan had more space and resources, Jenny was taken to live with them. On November 6, 1995, Jenny was found dead in the Gonzalez household. The autopsy revealed that she had suffered severe physical abuse, including burns, bruises, and internal injuries. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma. Evidence indicated that Jenny was forced to live in a box hung by her hands on a closet hook and was burned with a hairdryer. Veronica was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture and mutilation. In 1998, she was sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Veronica Gonzalez is 63 years old and has been on death row for approximately 27 years. Susan Caro. That night, Susan Caro shot and killed her 3 children while they slept in their beds. She then attempted to harm herself by shooting herself in the head, but survived the self-inflicted wound. After the incident, she was found in the family home and arrested. In 2002, Susan Caro was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including multiple deaths. As of January 2025, Susan Caro is 67 years old and has been on death row for approximately 23 years. Brooke Marie Rhoades. In 2006, 24-year-old Brooke Marie Rhoades, along with her accomplices Franchune Epps and Omar Hutchinson, was involved in the murders of Milton Chavez and Marvin Gabriel in Riverside County, California. The victims were lured into a motel room under the pretense of a sexual encounter, where they were later robbed and suffocated. Rhoades used her underwear to suffocate the men, even forcing a pair of panties into one of the victims' throats. The motive behind these brutal murders was theft. In October 2010, Rhoades was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances of multiple murders and murder during the commission of a robbery. she was sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Brooke Marie Rhoades is 42 years old and has been on death row in California for over 14 years, incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Cathy Lyn Sarinana. In December 2005, 30-year-old Cathy Lyn Sarinana, along with her husband Raul Ricardo Sarinana, was involved in the tragic deaths of their two nephews, 14-year-old Conrad Morales and 11-year-old Ricky Morales. The couple had taken the children into their home in Corona, California, with the intention of providing care. However, instead of offering a safe environment, they subjected them to prolonged abuse and neglect. In June 2009, Cathy Sarinana was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for her role in Ricky Morales' death. Her husband Raul received a similar sentence for his involvement in the children's deaths. As of January 2025, Cathy Lyn Sarinana is 50 years old and has been on death row in California for over 15 years. Her case is still in the appeals process. Cynthia Lynn Kaufman. Between October and November 1986, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman, along with her partner James Marlowe, committed a series of atrocious acts in several states, including the following crimes: the kidnapping and brutal murder of 32-year-old Sandra Neri on October 11, 1986 in Costa Mesa, California; the murder of 35-year-old Pamela Simmons on October 28, 1986 in Bullhead City, Arizona; the kidnapping and murder of 20-year-old Karina Noah on November 7, 1986 in Redlands, California; and the kidnapping and murder of 19-year-old Ly Murray on November 12, 1986 in Huntington Beach, California. The criminal spree of the couple ended on November 14, 1986, when they were apprehended. After their arrest, Kaufman confessed to the murders, but her defense attorneys argued that she suffered from battered woman syndrome, claiming that Marlowe had beaten her, manipulated her, and starved her, leading her to become involved in the crimes. In 1990, Kaufman was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in California to receive a death sentence since the restoration of the death penalty in the state in 1977. As of January 2025, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman is 63 years old and has been on death row in California for approximately 35 years. Kerry Lyn Dalton. In 1988, Kerry Lyn Dalton, along with her accomplices, kidnapped Irene Melanie May, a woman known to them. They held her captive, subjecting her to severe physical abuse, including the use of battery acid, and eventually murdered her. The brutality of the crime shocked the community and led to a swift investigation. Dalton was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances, including torture and stalking. In 1995, she was convicted and sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Kerry Lyn Dalton is 71 years old and has been on death row in California for over 35 years. Margaret Ann Allen. On November 6, 2005, 49-year-old Margaret Ann Allen committed a chilling crime in Titusville, Florida. Allen lived with her daughter when she began to suspect that her former housekeeper, 51-year-old Wendi Wright, had stolen money from her. Tensions between the two women escalated over these suspicions, and Allen believed Wright had taken $2,000 from her purse. Consumed by rage, Allen confronted Wright, accusing her of theft, and in a fit of anger, physically attacked Wright and forced her to swallow bleach and other chemicals. She then taped her mouth shut and killed her with a belt. Once Wright was dead, Allen, with the help of two accomplices, disposed of Wright's body in an isolated area near Mims, Florida. It wasn't long before investigators connected Allen to the crime. During the investigation, they found evidence linking Allen to Wright's death, and she was arrested shortly afterward. In 2011, Allen was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including torture and kidnapping. She was sentenced to death. As of 2025, Margaret Ann Allen is 68 years old and has spent almost 14 years on death row. Kimberly Cargill. On June 18, 2010, 43-year-old Kimberly Cargill committed the murder of 39-year-old Cherie Walker in Tyler, Texas. Cargill, a mother of 4 and a nurse, lived with 2 of her children. Cherie Walker, a woman with intellectual disabilities, worked as a babysitter for Cargill's children, and the two had known each other for several years. On that date, Cargill tricked Walker into coming to her home under the pretext of needing help. Once inside, she attacked Walker and suffocated her to death to prevent her from testifying in a child protection case. After the murder, Cargill disposed of Walker's body, doused it with lighter fluid, and set it on fire. The investigation into Walker's death led authorities to Cargill, who was arrested in 2012 and charged with capital murder. During the trial, it was revealed that Cargill was being investigated by the Department of Child Protective Services due to allegations of child abuse. Her 2 younger children, Luke and Zach, were removed from her custody and placed in the care of relatives. On May 18, 2010, Cargill violated the custody agreement by not returning her son to his mother after picking him up from daycare. Later, Cargill faced a custody hearing, and Cherie Walker received a subpoena to testify against her, which led to her death. In 2012, Cargill was convicted of capital murder. As of January 2025, Kimberly Cargill is 58 years old and has been on death row for approximately 14 years. Tina LaSonia Brown. On March 24, 2010, 39-year-old Tina Sona Brown committed the murder of 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman in Pensacola, Florida. Brown was a mother to a daughter, Brittany Miller, and had a criminal history related to drugs. On the day of the crime, Brown, along with her daughter Brittany and neighbor Heather Lee, ambushed Zimmerman, attacking her with a stun gun, gagging her, and confining her in the trunk of a car. The trio drove Zimmerman to a forest, where they beat her with an iron bar, doused her with gasoline, set her on fire, and left her to die. Zimmerman survived long enough to identify Brown, Miller, and Lee as her attackers before dying from her injuries 2 weeks later. After Zimmerman's death, authorities arrested Brown, her daughter Brittany, and neighbor Heather Lee. In 2012, Brown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Her daughter, Brittany Miller, received a life sentence, and Heather Lee was sentenced to 25 years in prison after testifying against Brown. As of January 2025, Tina Brown is 54 years old and has been on death row for approximately 12 years. Robin Roe. In the early hours of February 10, 1992, a fire consumed the duplex home of Robin Roe in Boise, Idaho. At the time, Roe was staying with a friend after a disagreement with her husband, Randy Roe. The fire resulted in the deaths of her husband, Randy, 34, and their 2 children, Joshua, 10, and Tabitha, 8. Investigations revealed that the smoke alarm had been disabled, and an accelerant had been used to start the fire. Additionally, it was discovered that Robin, who was 34 years old at the time of the crime, had taken out large life insurance policies on her family members before the incident. Roe was arrested on February 3, 1992, and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. During the trial, evidence was presented showing that she had a history of financial difficulties and had received insurance money in a previous incident in 1980, when her son Keith died in a fire under suspicious circumstances. In March 1993, Roe was found guilty of all charges, and on December 16, 1993, she was sentenced to death. As of January 2025, Robin Rowe is 67 years old and has been on death row for approximately 32 years.